Yeah, we need to. Good morning. We'll bring this hearing to order. The subcommittee meets today to review the Air Force acquisition modernization programs in the fiscal year 2020 budget request. I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel today. That includes the Honorable Will Roper, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, General Mike Holmes, the Commander of the Air Force Air Combat, Major General Nahum, Director of the Air Force Programs for the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans, Lieutenant General Tony Iardi, did I get that right? Terrific. Director of Force Structure, Resources, and Assessments for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Vice Admiral Matt Winter, Director of the F-35 Joint Strike Program. The Honorable Bob DeGill, Director of Cost Analysis and Program Evaluation for Secretary of Defense. The Honorable Bob Baylor, Director of Operational Testing and Evaluation for the Department of Defense, and Mr. Mike Sullivan, Director of the Defense Weapons System and Acquisitions for the Government Accountability Office, which I'd spent reading through your reports about midnight last night. And thank you, very important. I want to thank our witnesses for your service and your time here today. Look forward towards your testimony. As we review the Air Force budget request today, we want to review the changes that have been made over this year's budget over last year and understand why the difference from what was forecasted last year in fiscal 19 budget to this year. We need to understand how the Air Force budget request aligns with the objectives of the National Defense Strategy in competing and deterring our near-peer adversaries. What investments are being made to increase the combat effectiveness, capacity, and capabilities of the Air Force intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or the ISR platforms, as well as tactical combat and training aircraft, rotorcraft, and munitions? What acquisition efficiencies and their authorities are being implemented to more quickly modernize and reduce the advantage of many of our Air Force fleets of aircrafts under this subcommittee's purview? One of the most important, arguably controversial changes we will talk about today relates to the Air Force decision to start a new recapitalization of the F-15C fleet. This involves advanced fourth-generation version of the F-15, now called F-15EX, to complement their fifth-generation F-22 and F-35 capabilities. We need to understand what new capabilities and certainly cost efficiencies of the F-15EX can bring to the Air Force tactical aircraft portfolio and why the Air Force has shifted from what we heard for the last 4 years about fifth-generation fighters and why that has shifted. We also want to update on the F-35 program, challenges in achieving significantly lower operational and sustainment costs that continues to dog this program. The Air Force has told us they are going to reduce those costs by 43% in order to afford owning and operating the original inventory as we had proposed. 43% is an incredibly high number, but we certainly understand why that is happening. We also want to understand how the Joint Program Office will get control and fix the problematic ALICE system. We had a number of folks over the last 2 weeks brief us on that, and looking forward in the program, we need an update on the Black 4 development and its projected cost. In order to fully understand these issues, we must first understand the capability and capacity of our tactical fighter industrial base. What is the F-35 program office doing to increase the stability of the prime contractors' continuing problems with supply chain and parts management for both new production and fielded aircraft? And how does this factor into supporting an increased quantities of the future F-35A purchase? If we start to build the new F-15EX program, what are the production capacities and challenges anticipated by the Air Force? How will the Air Force ensure that the costs are controlled before committing to development and a production contract over several years? Fifth and fourth generation fighter aircraft, a critical capability for our Air Force, and this subcommittee will continue to support these programs, but we don't have an unlimited budget. We don't have an unlimited budget. We need to achieve real affordability, hard to define, and sometimes elusive, but we can do this. The ranking member and I took an opportunity to travel just a few weeks ago to see the F-35 production line, and then immediately thereafter went to the F-15 production line. And this is what makes you so proud of America, what we can build, what we can do. The facilities, the workers were just remarkable and very much understood where they fit into our national defense. Mrs. Hartzler and I were impressed, I would even say inspired, and it was an excellent chance to see firsthand some of the things that we talk about here in this committee. I want to publicly thank all those who made it possible to get that comprehensive look at these challenging programs, and certainly that fall into our jurisdiction. Similar to tactical aviation, subcommittee is also paying close attention to the ISR program and efforts to sustain modernize key capabilities. As everyone may recall, last year's budget included a seismic shift in the Air Force battle management command control modernization technology. The long-planned recapitalization of Joint Stars aircraft was abandoned, and in its place, a new concept existing yet to be defined program coined the ABMS, Advanced Battle Management System. The committee remains concerned about the lack of formal program structure, benchmarks against which we would measure this ABMS progress, as well as uncertainty surrounding Air Force plans to provide effective and timely ground motion target indicator intelligence, the GMTI. Subcommittee is also focused on how the budget request supports sustaining the Air Force big wing ISR programs after several budget cycles. The uneven funding and support and alternative planning is, to support alternating plans to terminate different programs. The Air Force appears to agree that we need all the current ISR capabilities as it can muster. However, the service needs to map out a recapitalization program for those big wing aircraft to ensure continued viability, relevance for the national defense strategy and the near-peer threats. I look forward to your testimony in discussing these topics, but before we begin with the opening statements, I would like to turn to my colleague who we just did our travel out west to a number of the bases for her opening comments this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for organizing that trip, too. It was very, very helpful and very pertinent to what we're talking about today. I'd like to thank everybody who is here today and to provide your testimony on the Air Force modernization efforts and the fiscal year 2020 request. The National Defense Strategy Commission concluded that, quote, regardless of where the next conflict occurs or which adversary it features, the Air Force will be at the forefront, end quote. Modernization needs to be properly resourced to ensure the Air Force remains relevant and ready, which is why we need to work together to ensure a defense top line that shows real growth. If we fail to do so, then we will erase all of the gains that we have made over the past 3 years. We have a distinguished panel of witnesses here today, and given their expertise, I look forward to having a healthy discussion on the appropriate fighter force structure required for the Air Force to meet the objectives of the National Defense Strategy. General Goldfein has stated that, quote, we're going to be a mix well into the 2030s of 4th gen and 5th gen fighters, and they complement each other. 1 + 1, 4th gen plus 5th gen, actually equals 3 fighters if they're used correctly because they each make each other better, end quote. During my recent travels with the chairman, touring the fighter industrial base and observing a recent red flag exercise at Nellis Air Force Base, it appears clear to me we will need a highly capable mix of fourth generation and fifth generation aircraft complementing one another in order to meet the objectives of the National Defense Strategy. I understand the Air Force is striving for a 50-50 mix of fourth generation and fifth generation aircraft by 2030 that will meet that capability and capacity requirements. General Goldfein has also stated that the F-15C fleet will not make it to 2030, and that, begin quote, we have got to refresh the F-15C fleet because I can't afford to not have that capacity to do the jobs and the missions right. If that is the case, then we need to focus on what is best for the F-15C fleet, and I look forward to discussing this critical issue today. The F-22 was the planned replacement for the F-15C fleet, and the 2008 decision by the Office of the Secretary of Defense to truncate the F-22 buy is now proving that was a budget-driven, short-sighted decision with long-term consequences. There is no doubt the capabilities that F-35 and fifth generation brings to the battlefield against advanced threats by peer competitors is critically needed to meet the goals and objectives of the National Defense Strategy. We all share concerns about rising F-35 operations and support costs affecting long-term affordability, which could result in lower procurement quantities in the out years. For today, regarding the F-35 program, I'm interested in receiving updates and discussing the initial operational test and evaluation that is ongoing, the acquisition plan and cost estimates for the Block 4 modernization program, the findings from the last selective acquisition report from the Department of Defense, which showed increases for both acquisition and operation and support costs, the actions being taken to increase availability of spare parts and improve overall reliability and performance, and the actions being taken now in this budget request to lower operation and sustainment costs to include ramping up organic depot capability, improving the Atomic Logistics Information System, or ALICE, and improving the time associated for long lead parts. The F-35 Joint Program Office, along with the military services, appear to be very focused on reducing these costs. However, significant challenges remain ahead. We look forward to working with each of you and industry in a collaborative manner to reach your objectives for this important program. Today is also a good opportunity for the witnesses to update us on what they're doing to mitigate physiological episodes and how the Air Force is coordinating efforts with the Navy. I was pleased that the budget request fully funds A-10 modernization to include the re-wing effort, and I expect the witnesses to address this program as well as touch on any operational readiness challenges in the A-10 fleet. And finally, I'm interested to hear today from our witnesses on the progress being made in the development of advanced munition capabilities. In order for us to maintain comparative advantage, we need to ensure that munitions and weapons are being upgraded and developed. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today, and I yield back.
Thank you for your comments. And given our large panel of witnesses today, we ask they condense their opening remarks to approximately 3 minutes or less. And without objection, the formal written statements will be entered into the record without objection. So ordered. With that, we will begin our opening remarks with Dr. Roper, followed by General Holmes, Mr. Daigle, General Iardi, Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Baylor, Admiral Winter. That gives 7 out of 8. So we have a great panel here with lots of knowledge, but we also have a time factor. So thank you for being here.
Chairman Norcross and Ranking Member Hartzler, members of the committee, thank you very much for holding a hearing on this important topic. I think it's fair to say that we're very excited to talk with you about the progress that we've made in this important portfolio. We're also very interested to talk about the challenges that we face and things that we can both work on together to overcome them. We'll talk a lot about programmatics and requirements and specifics of programs, but I want to just start by saying that we come into this review looking at a strategic environment again. You know, China is no joke. They have a plan, they have capabilities to match us both technologically, operationally, and we have to regain the ability to compete with them over time. This committee has made important strides in giving us authorities to work at a greater speed with greater agility so that we do deliver capabilities at a speed of relevance for our warfighters. We're trying to make strides this year to increase our connection with a broader defense industrial base, be able to work with tech startups, be able to work with the entire innovation base this country brings. Because ultimately the bottom line is about giving the warfighter that critical advantage in the fight that the adversary doesn't have. I look forward to your questions today, to discussing the progress that we've made in acquisition reform, but we are by no means done. We can never be satisfied with the pace at which we move. We can never be satisfied with the capabilities that we have. This will be a competition over time, and I hope that you'll find the Air Force is taking this challenge seriously and that we have made progress in becoming the competitive force that this nation needs. Thank you.
The light doesn't come on, so how's that? Is it on now? Thanks. Okay, great, thanks. Good morning, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. General Nahom and I thank you for inviting us to join you today, and as part of our thankfulness, we'll combine our statement and just do one. I echo Dr. Roper's statement, and I can attest to the acquisition advancements we've made under the authorities granted to us by the Congress. As the commander of Air Combat Command, I'm responsible for training and equipping much of the Air Force's fighter, rescue, command and control, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and cyber forces, all with the goal of ensuring that we present competent, effective, and lethal forces to combatant commanders. On behalf of the over 93,000 airmen in Air Combat Command, I'd like to thank you for ensuring that we received an on-time budget for this fiscal year. It's incredibly important for us in planning and execution stability, particularly as we focus on sustaining the force we have while we transition to a more modern force to meet the threats that Dr. Roper described. Because of that budget, we're on track to meet the readiness goals set by the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Air Force, and are able to begin right-sizing our force in accordance with the objectives of the 2018 NDAA. We do, however, face challenges in keeping these investments on track as a result of the natural disaster damage inflicted by hurricanes and floods at Tyndall and Offutt Air Force bases. Moving forward, our 2020 National Defense Budget request provides the modernization and sustainment funding we need to grow into a stronger and more lethal force. However, as Dr. Roper discussed, we can't remain dominant against our peer competitors unless we also outpace them in our acquisition process. Our aging Air Force is currently too small to fight the wars of tomorrow. We've made strides, but we must not lose sight of our responsibilities to sustain what we have while we modernize for the future. I look forward to engaging with the Congress as we work together to address these challenges. And again, thank you to the members of this subcommittee for your dedication to the Air Force, our armed services, and the American people. General Nahom and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today the results of the department's collaborative efforts on TAC Air Mix. I'll keep my opening statement very short. I just want to comment that I think this is a really good example of how the budget process can work well. In 2016, Congress tasked the department to do a fighter force mix study. The results of that study have since been validated by service analysis and by operational testing. That information informed the deliberations inside the budget process inside the building this cycle, and resulted in an agreement between the Air Force and the Navy and the Department on the right way forward on TAC Air Mix to meet the demands of the National Defense Strategy. I'd like to thank your staff of the Armed Services Committee for the collaboration over the last few months as following budget rollout. It's been a good team to work with. Thank you.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the support of the men and women in uniform, for your support to the men and women in uniform who serve our nation, for the opportunity to address your questions related to tactical air and land forces initiatives. In his testimony in March to the House Armed Services Committee, General Dunford discussed several challenges the Joint Military Net Assessment identified, and including the Joint Forces' decreasing competitive advantage vis-a-vis our adversaries. The 2019 Joint Military Net Assessment and a follow-on competitive area studies assessment by the Joint Staff outlined capability, capacity, and readiness issues within the tactical air portfolio that informed the chairman's program recommendations to the Secretary of Defense in preparations for this year's budget submission. The chairman's recommendations focused on balancing the capabilities we need for today's operations with the depth, flexibility, and advanced technologies required to respond to the challenges of the future. From the joint perspective, fifth-generation capabilities remain essential to success against near-peer competitors. However, adapting the force we have today while we design the force needed for tomorrow, those challenges tomorrow, requires a mix of capabilities within the TAC Air portfolio. In the short term, the fourth-generation aircraft fleet provides essential capacity to meet the national defense strategy demands that we continue to acquire and while we continue to acquire and modernize our fifth-generation aircraft. In the long term, this portfolio transitions to a majority of fifth-generation aircraft as we continue to acquire the F-35 through 2040. In the interim, we must maintain a relevant mix of fourth-generation capability and capacity to meet the demands across the national defense strategy as multiple airframes exceed their service life over the next decade. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to appear before this committee, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today to discuss the F-35 Lightning II acquisition and sustainment programs, as well as the Advanced Battle Management System. Development of the baseline F-35 weapon system was recently completed after 18 challenging years. While the cost of development increased by more than 50% and the services waited years longer than originally planned, the aircraft is fully capable today, when able to fly, to carry out all of its missions. The remaining issues now are reliability and affordability. The program tracks 8 reliability metrics today for the aircraft and is currently on track to meet 4 of them. Meeting these targets is critical for maintaining the aircraft's availability and mission capability goals within an affordable 60-year life cycle. The current estimate for that cost is over $1 trillion, and the department is on record as stating that is not affordable. The program is working now to revise its reliability management plans and activities and hopes to make continued success as they move forward. The program has also initiated activities to modernize the baseline aircraft with new capabilities, known as Block 4 modernization. The current estimated cost for this development program is about $10.5 billion through 2024. We have concerns that the program will sign development contracts that lock in risk before it has completed an independent cost estimate or technology readiness review, 2 key activities that help to reduce risk prior to committing large amounts of funding. We also believe that the modernization program should be a major defense acquisition program with its own cost and schedule baselines to provide the Congress with transparent program reporting. With regard to the status of sustainment efforts, we have concerns that those cost estimates continue to rise. Large part of these rising costs are significant spare parts shortages and limited repair capabilities. For example, between May and November of 2018, the aircraft was unable to fly about 30% of the time due to spare parts shortages. GAO recently issued a report and made recommendations to improve this condition. The department concurred with those recommendations. The Air Force's Advanced Battle Management System acquisition is still in its very early stages. It is planned to eventually manage detection, identification, and tracking of airborne, maritime, and ground relocatable targets. The Air Force is currently in the midst of performing an analysis of alternatives for delivering air-centric capabilities and is using an existing analysis to assess best alternatives for handling the ground target tracking capabilities. Because the program is so young, we only have very preliminary observations on that. However, we plan to continue to report on that program as things unfold. That concludes my statement. I look forward to questions.
Chairman Norcross and Ranking Member Hartzler and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, I too am honored to be here with this distinguished panel of witnesses to address the status of tactical air and modernization programs that fall under my oversight as the Director of Operational Tests and Evaluation. I would like to focus my opening comments in 2 key areas. the status of ongoing F-35 initial operational tests and evaluation, and the operational test infrastructure needed to support emergent technologies for new weapons. In January of 2018, I observed the start of F-35 operational evaluations with cold weather testing in Alaska. Working with the program office and the operational test agencies, I approved additional operational evaluations, which enabled IOT&E to start 11 months early. As of May, the test team has completed over 2/3 of all the open-air IOT&E testing and weapons events. Operational testing to date has included cybersecurity, open-air test trials, which included F-35 deployments and weapon employment. The test team has compared the F-35 to fourth-generation fighters against both legacy and modern surface-to-air threats. As prescribed in the FY17 NDAA, comparison testing to examine the capabilities of the F-35A and the A-10C was completed last month, March. The existing test plan specifies 2 final phases in IOT&E as open-air electronic warfare trials against robust surface-air threats and simulated dense, modern surface and air threats in the joint simulation environment. I have guarded optimism that the open-air testing will be completed later this fall, followed by test trials in the joint simulation environment that will stress the F-35 against validated models to real advanced world threats. The current schedule projects IOT need to be completed at the end of this calendar year. Before closing, I'd like to briefly turn to the topic of testing emergent technologies that are addressed in the National Defense Strategy, such as hypersonics and artificial intelligence. This is a very complicated challenge. Emergent technologies will drive the need for new test infrastructure requirements. Technologies like hypersonic weapon systems will require advanced data collection, long-range tracking capacity, and safety issues. Weapons that use artificial intelligence and machine learning will require new measurement methods that can determine whether the computer will make the right decisions in combat. Thank you for your attention and your continuous support of the servicemen and women. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appeared before you last month with the Navy and the Marine Corps. I'm back here with my esteemed colleagues to talk about the U.S. Air Force acquisition and modernization efforts and how the F-35 participates in that and supports the National Defense Strategy. I continuously appreciate your insight, oversight, and interest in the F-35 program. As we look at what's occurred over this last year, considerable progress has been made, but as we've heard, there's still plenty of challenges that we must tackle together. We have finished our Block 3 flight tests. We've delivered Block 3F warfighting capability. We've begun IOT&E. We've definitized our Lot 11 production aircraft at an $89.2 million F-35A. That's a 5% reduction over the previous lot. We've increased our U.S. depot repair capacity, but not to the extent that we need to. We still have those challenges. We've upgraded some of our international maintenance and repair facilities in our European and Pacific region, and we've established credible flying hour metrics, cost per flying hour metrics, so that we can get our hands around the total ownership costs for the F-35 together. We've also supported numerous U.S. service operational activities across our U.S. services, the Marine Corps, Navy, and United States Air Force, to include the United States Air Force first combat employment that occurred this week in the CENTCOM AOR. In terms of Air Force modernization and acquisition, the F-35 remains the Air Force's latest fifth-generation fighter and is planned to operate alongside their fourth-gen and fifth-gen aviation capabilities. We see the F-35 truly as the quarterback of that joint force, and with its ability to collect, analyze, and share the data, is a true force multiplier across the battle space. With over 400 aircraft fielded across all variants, the F-35 is more affordable and more lethal than it has been in the past. However, as I stated a month ago, and I'll tell you today, I am not satisfied as the PEO of the F-35 Joint Program Office. We still face challenges in repair span times, industry's ability to provide spare parts, quality and on time, our production flow and production line inefficiencies, and some of the labor skills that are being drawn away from the military enterprise into the commercial enterprise for aviation demand. We are tackling these challenges together with a head-on clear mandate to drive in that affordability, that quality, and reliability across the enterprise. This year's President's budget requests the resources to achieve the goals of 80% MC, to get to an $80 million F-35A, and to get to an affordable cost per flying hour and cost per tail per year for our U.S. services. On behalf of the men and women of the F-35 enterprise, you have my commitment to provide you the accountability and transparency the taxpayer demands and the affordable, game-changing capability the warfighter needs. I thank you again for the opportunity to discuss the F-35 program and look forward to your questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for all your testimony. The most expensive system that the United States has ever attempted, and we have some great results, but we have some challenges. Getting under that 90 million for the Type A is great, but when the sustainment costs continue to be the numbers that we're looking at and not being ready 30% of the time, we got some real challenges. So for the last 4 years in particular, we've been hearing about fifth generation. And this year, it was dropped on our laps about an F-15 coming into play. So I want to start there. There's a number of other issues we have to address. General Holmes, past couple of years, we've been talking about the program that we're talking about today. The extended service life of the F-15C appears to be a real challenge at this point. Can you walk us through why this committee, I'm fielding questions from virtually everyone saying, why are we only focused on fifth generation for 4 years and now fourth generation? Why don't you walk us through specifically what has changed in the last 11 months for this decision to come before us?
Is that better? Thank you. I'll try to get better. And to start, Mr. Chairman, I'd go back to a couple of things that you talked about in your remarks and in the question. And the first is the limited budget that we face. And we have tremendous needs across the Air Force and across the armed services for improvements in modernization and sustainment. And we have to balance all those across all our portfolios. And the second one, I think, is the health and the age of the 2,100 fighters that the National Defense Strategy requires for the Air Force to be able to accomplish the missions that they've asked us to do. We have been on a path of purchasing less than 20 new fighters a year since Desert Storm. So that's a 1% replacement rate. That would put us on a 100-year recapitalization schedule for our fighters. And so that's how we get to a fighter force that averages more than 30 years old. And the impacts of that are our tremendous depot system and the American people that you saw on the assembly lines and also at the depots have worked miracles to keep those old airplanes useful, but we're getting to the point where it costs too much to do it. And the F-15C is a prime example of that. The airplane has structural problems that will require replacement of major structural members, the longerons that run lengthwise in the airplane, followed by the wings being replaced, and then followed by bulkheads on the center fuselage, which means it'd be better to buy a new airplane than to try to work through those repairs.
That's important. Walk through, we originally budgeted approximately $1 million per plane. After the knowledge that came through on structural, what does that take the number up to?
Well, so the exact number will depend on the time that you go after, but that $1 million per plane was based on fuselage longerons. And as you add the wings and the fuselage into it, the initial estimates we dealt with were in the tens of millions per airplane. I think as we work with the prime contractor now, you can get that number probably down around 10 million or so per airplane, but that's an approximation. You don't really know until you open the airplanes up. What we do know is that right now we have airplanes that are failing the inspection and are being parked until we can order the parts to begin that replacement process. And our F-15 training unit at Klamath Falls in Oregon has 9 airplanes that they're unable to fly because of the structural condition. If you look across the rest of our fighter force, the F-15 is failing first. The A-10, as Ranking Member Hartzler pointed out, faces problems with wings. For the F-16 fleet, it's a service life extension program that will require many airplanes to go into the depot to be repaired, which will cut down the availability of the entire fleet. For the F-22, it's engines and the depot capability to support repairing and replacing engines to make up for the extra flying time. So what that means is that we need more airplanes per year, and we're approaching a crisis point to get there. And when we looked at the limited budget, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, we determined, along with the analysis that CAPE did and with the department, that the most cost-effective way to begin acquiring more than 48 fighters a year was to do a mixed buy of 4th and 5th gen airplanes. You know, why is it more cost-effective? Matt, Vice Admiral Winter and his team have done a great job with Lockheed of driving down the cost of the air vehicle itself and producing an airplane that we're very happy with. The guys flying the F-35 now are very pleased with the performance of the air vehicle itself, and it's achieving great results at places like Red Flag, where Ranking Member Hartzler visited, and some of you were along with her, and in his first combat deployment. We still face challenges in the sustainment cost, as you pointed out, and as Vice Admiral Winter pointed out, that I hope we will get to, but it will be multiple years to drive those sustainment costs down to where they match the F-15. And then as we bed down additional fighters, there are additional costs that go with the bed down of the F-35, because you need low observable maintenance facilities. You need some facilities that are not required for the F-15. There's additional cost per location if you add F-35s. So ultimately, the balance between cost and our urgent need to meet capacity has led us to propose that we pursue a mixture of both 4th and 5th gen airplanes as the most cost-effective way to balance the capability that we need to acquire in the future with the capacity that we have to have every day to do the missions that the Secretary of Defense and our national leaders ask us to do.
So what started this initial question is that the F-22 was going to replace the F-15. That came up short. Then the F-35, if it had originally ramped up, we would not be in this position. We're considerably behind. So of all the inventory that the Air Force could have picked, why the F-15EX?
Thank you, sir. I think partly it was because of the F-15 being the kind of the first airplane to fail, the F-15C. And if we want to replace aircraft and have the minimum impact on readiness across the Air Force, then replacing like aircraft with a reasonably like aircraft offers us the least reduction in readiness while we do it. If a Air National Guard unit transitions from the F-15C to the F-35, it takes about 3 years to fully train all the aircrew members and the maintainers that work on the airplane in the unit, because a lot of them are part-timers and they have to schedule their training over a long period of time to be able to work through that. If you replace the F-15C with an F-15EX, much of the airplane is the same. It's a very short training period. The transition maintainers, a very small training program to transition the aircrew members. And so it has the least impact on reduction, or the least impact on readiness, of the force during a transition. And then we're able to take advantage of investment that other nations had made in improving the F-15 airframe. Saudi Arabia and Qatar had spent money to develop improvements to the airplane that would now be available to us at a reduced or no cost to incorporate. And for a combination, I think, of those two reasons, we picked the F-15EX.
And we're focused on this because this is a major shift on the thinking. We're not anywhere near what the original projections were in purchasing the F-35 for a variety of reasons. And would there be a scenario, given what we understand now for the F-35 line, that it could, you would have to almost double the production in order for it to come in at a replacement rate that would keep the F-15EX from coming online? Do we see that ability with the parts not coming in anywhere near what they need to? Is there anything we can do to the F-35 line to prevent us from going to the F-15, the EX?
Mr. Chairman, I'd probably asked for the details of that question to go to my friend Vice Admiral Winter in the Joint Program Office. But as we look at what we think of as the 7 or 8 elements that it takes to actually field the weapon system of the F-35, producing the aircraft itself is one part of that. It's then keeping up with a simulator that matches the configuration of the airplane. It's the AME, the other equipment that goes on the airplane where you can hang bomb racks and do those parts of it. It's the joint planning system. It's ALICE. It's all the different parts, sustainment, depot of the system. My concern would be bringing all of those 8 elements along at the same time, because right now the air vehicle is out ahead of those other elements. And so producing more airplanes would be one part of it, but keeping up in all of those other areas, to me, would be the challenge. But I think Vice Admiral Winter is more prepared to answer that.
And we need to be focused. I get more questions on this issue than any other item. Why the shift? So we're not backing off of the F-35. Is that an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement, sir.
Is there anything, in your opinion, we could do, given the facilities, given the parts issue, the sustainment costs, that we could focus on in order for us not to also bring in that 4th generation?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll talk about the business case that makes affordability a lucrative optic for F-35, and I'll allow General Holmes and others to talk about would they not purchase F-15s. But from an F-35 perspective, when we look at it theoretically, and when I mean that, bill of material, what does it cost to actually assemble an F-35? And we do that in a propulsion, so engine from Pratt & Whitney and the airframe and systems from Lockheed Martin. When we look at our cost analysis for that, we can see a bill of material that is in an affordable range below $80 million. We can see
Just
that.
for the purchase.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'd start with the purchase, because if you don't buy them, you don't need to sustain them. The fact that we are making that progress and we're seeing the actual progress is encouraging. My challenge is in the assembly. So the bill of material and the cost of the material keeps coming down because of volume, but the ability for those vendors in the supply chain to get those parts to the production line at the time we need them as the airframe is coming down the production line is behind. And so therefore the cost, the labor cost of the human beings putting these things together is my biggest cost increase. And so therefore I'm hitting a stagnant plateau with Lockheed Martin because they're 600 parts a month behind on average, 600 parts not on the production line when I need them. So the aircraft is going slower down the production line than I need it to be. That drives cost. And from that cost, I have to look across my portfolio. And when I look at sustaining the 400 plus aircraft that are out flying right now, I need parts to fix the airplane. As Mr. Sullivan said, the reliability is getting better, but it's not where it needs to be. So it's a multidimensional, interdependent problem that we're trying to
So
solve.
you're telling me the production line is in competition with the repair line for those parts when they become available?
I'm saying the supply chain is in competition. Absolutely, sir. That supplier that generates a widget is generating a new widget for the production line for our spares package, and we still have them repairing the ones that are breaking in the field. Our initiative, to Ranking Member Hartzler's comment, we are taking that demand off the supply chain by putting it into our U.S. Air Force and Navy and Marine Corps depots here in the United States so we can repair the broken parts, allowing the supply chain to focus on generating new parts. But we are not there yet.
I know Mrs. Hartzler has some questions on the F-15, and we'll get back to some of my questions because everybody here is very focused on this.
Yeah, really, really good discussion, good questions, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on some of this. So I wanted to give Dr. Roper and Mr. Daigle also an opportunity to weigh in on a little bit why the Air Force is buying the new 4th generation aircraft over the advanced 5th generation. Do you have anything you want to add? General Holmes gave a good explanation, but do you have anything you want to add?
Ranking Member Hartzler, The number of aircraft that are needed to keep our readiness comes to me as a warfighter requirement. So the Air Force, working with others, look at the number of fighters that we need to buy each year to make sure that we have the capacity to go to war. And I think it goes without saying, we want as many fifth generation systems as we can possibly have. We want to get the F-35 healed and fixed and into full rate production so that we can become an increasingly fifth generation force. But because of issues in the past, we can't buy that number of airplanes currently. And so when the commander of Air Combat Command says, I need more than 48 fighters per year, the chief of staff, we have to go look at the fourth generation line. Now, General Holmes hit it exactly correct. The F-15C is very difficult to sustain. I have been to Tinker Air Force Base twice to go through the F-15C line in depot maintenance. It is a hard aircraft to maintain because over 2/3 of the fleet is past its service life. We're having to now replace parts that weren't intended to be replaced. These are difficult to purchase. They have long lead times, especially the longerons. And so we're past the point the fighter was supposed to be. Now, when you look at, is there an option to try to provide the warfighter a solution other than try to extend the seas further into the future than they were meant to go? We can pivot to what our foreign military sales have done on the F-15E line. The upgrades that the Qataris and Saudi Arabia have done to that line would be major defense acquisition programs in and of themselves. They've upgraded the radar, they've upgraded the avionics, they've updated the electronic warfare and the cockpit. So this is a lot of foreign investment in that system that our warfighters can benefit from. So going back to Air Combat Command and our Chief of Staff, I have two options to try to give them more than the 48 F-35s that they're getting. It's a plan to try to sustain the seas at high cost, or a pivot to try to buy a much better aircraft that will be much more sustainable. And from the acquisition point of view, of course, modernizing and benefiting from those over $2 billion of foreign investment is an appealing plan.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Daigle, and I want you to expand a little bit more on, you alluded to in your comment that this whole mix study began in 2016 with Congress and the NDAA requiring this study, and as a result of that, that is what has resulted in the TAC Air mix that's being put forth. So at what point in your study did you identify that we wanted to have F-15s and F-35s this year?
So the fighter force mix study and subsequent analysis basically showed that as far out as the eye can see, the department will need a mix of penetrating assets and standoff assets. And this is common across any kind of portfolio we want to look at. If we look at ISR, we have some very high-end penetrating stealthy ISR assets. We also have, for example, MQ-9s that are not really useful in that kind of an environment, but are really useful in permissive environments. The same is true in the bomber fleet. We have, high-end penetrating bombers. We have standoff bombers that are basically very large missile trucks, for lack of a better word. So from our perspective, this is another version of that same conversation of how do we match the capabilities that we can procure to the mission sets that are generated under the National Defense Strategy. And that's what the fighter force mix did. And it said, kind of as far out as the eye can see, that some kind of mix is going to be appropriate. And then we get into the affordability question. We've already talked in the room a number of times about the sustainment costs of the F-35 versus sustainment costs of fourth generation platforms. Chairman Norcross, to go back to a question that you asked about, could we ramp up? From the analysis that the department has done, the next marginal dollar wouldn't necessarily go into increasing the richness, if you will, of the tactical aircraft portfolio. If we look at tomorrow's war fights, the things that really matter are joint communications, space control. So as long as there's a delta in the costs of the planes, and the department doesn't see a pathway right now where we can get fifth generation sustainment costs down to what we're seeing on the fourth gen fleet. As long as that delta exists, then prudence dictates by the platforms that align to the mission set in a way where you can kind of get as much capacity out of the available dollars as you can, and then take any money that you have left over and put it against the really highly critical gaps in the warfighting portfolio. And again, I would naturally look to cyber and space and joint communications, joint battle management. Those things are really the drivers for the effectiveness of the joint force going forward based on the analysis that the department has been doing.
Thank you. I would like General Holmes and General Noam to talk a little bit about how the F-15X and F-35 complement one another in their capability perspective, and what unique capabilities the F-15X bring into the tactical fighter inventory, whether in terms of range or payload or standoff.
Yes, ma'am. So beginning with the statement that, there are environments that the F-35 can operate in that the F-15EX can't, and that's a simple fact. There are places that you wouldn't want to send the F-15EX that you can send the F-35 as part of a team. But in the environment, say, of the last couple of years of combat over Syria, where we faced Russian air defenses and Russian fighters, the combination of F-15s, A-10s, F-16s, paired with an F-22 as a fifth-gen quarterback to be able to detect threats that the others can't, to be able to pass information to them that they wouldn't get on their onboard systems, has made them more effective and kept them safer in that environment. And with the F-35 deployed there today, you'll see the same thing in the benefits of partnership. When the F-35 gets more information than anybody else has and then shares it across the network, then it makes the whole team better. And then the capacity that's in the fourth-gen fleet means that you can carry more weapons, you can stay out there longer. And so they do complement each other. And as Mr. Daigle pointed out, no matter where we go with trying to get to 72 airplanes for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a mix of fourth and fifth-gen airplanes flying together and fighting together to deter or counter the threats that we face.
General Naum, do you have anything you want to add?
No, ma'am, just that was really what we looked at very closely with our friends in CAPE over the summer, was there is a difference in the cost of operating these airplanes right now based on the numbers we looked at over the summer. And it was trying to get to that capacity, because when you get into, even in the 2030s, 10 plus years from now, there are missions we're going to rely on fourth generation airplanes to accomplish. Certainly they can't do some of the missions, as General Holmes highlighted, but there's missions we are going to need to get done, and we're going to rely on fourth-generation airplanes, the F-15E, the A-10 for the next 10 years, and certainly later block F-16s. And the significant problem we had looking at the portfolio, as Dr. Roper highlighted, that we can't rely on the F-15C to get us to that point. So it was about filling that capacity.
Very good. I have a few more, but let's get to some other members here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Dr. Roper. What is the length of the projected life extension of the 173 A-10 Thunderbolts that have received new wing sets, and of the remainder that are planned to receive new wings?
Congressman, thank you for the question. We're currently going through the source selection for those wings right now. We are certainly hoping that we're going to get to benefit from modern digital engineering practices so that we'll be able to do the re-winging quickly. The specifics of how long we're going to be able to extend are going to be based on the specific proposals that come from vendors, but I'm hoping for at least 10 years. So I will take that for the record, and once we're through selection, I will make sure I get you that information, sir.
Great. I also see in the hearing memo that the remaining 108 A-10s in need of new wings will be delivered by FY22. When will the re-wing of those aircraft be completed?
Again, Congressman, that does depend on the specifics of the proposal, but we are incentivizing the rapid re-winging as quickly as possible. That's one of the performance metrics. So we know the warfighter needs to be able to fly those A-10s, so we're incentivizing speed in the selection, sir. And
the warfighter on the ground needs their air support. Mr. Beller, I understand that you're moving forward on the comparison testing between the F-35A and the A-10C, and the testing of the two planes' close air support, combat search and rescue, and airborne forward air control capabilities was completed in March at Edwards Air Force Base. I almost messed it up. In March at Edwards Air Force Base. Do you have any initial results of this operational testing that you'd like to share with us? Mike.
Thank you very much for that question. We did complete it last month. We are still, of course, analyzing the data. The first testing was done last April. We got about 2/3 of it done then, and then we had to A-10s had to go back to the operation. Brought them back in March, and we were able to really stress both airplanes. And the whole idea was basically to look at the capabilities of both. I just want to make sure everyone realizes this is not a fly-off, which was better, because they both have awesome capabilities, kind of the same line of comments that General Holmes had. We stressed these both day and night against moving targets, terrain where it's urban. We used the threats on the ground were radar-guided SAM missiles. We had MANPADS, we had AAA, so this was a very stressful environment. When we had the combat search and rescue, we actually had a downed crew member out there at nighttime. And during that mission, we actually brought in either HH-60s or MC-22s to recover the downed crew member. So it was a very, very stressful thing. But, you know, I have to stay within the operational security aspects. Sure. We have airplanes in combat as we speak with both of these. But I'll just give you two very, I think, important points that we were able to find so far without analyzing all the data. Is the F-35, as we expected, has a big advantage in a high threat scenario where the stealth and sensor fusion really helps. In a lesser threat environment, we're able to put more weapons on the wings of the F-35, so we're able to get much better loads on the aircraft. The A-10C, as we thought, in a low threat environment, with more fuel and more weapons, they really do a very good job. And the other part about the A-10C is that they specialize avionics for those three missions that you mentioned. And one thing that can't be overlooked is that there's 40 years of experience close to the ground with the A-10, and training really matters. We had, in the second part of the testing in March, we had A-10 pilots, former A-10 pilots, that are now part of the F-35 force.
Mr. Ballard, just because I want to get a couple more questions in, I'm going to cut you off.
Okay.
When will we get the full report as to the committee?
Well, the committee will get the full report with the Beyond LRIP report, which I hope is going to be at the end of this year. But when we analyze the data, I'd be happy to come at the right form and give you the data as we see it when we have it.
And who will be responsible for the final report? Will it be OT&E or the F-35 Joint Operational Test Team?
It'll be me.
It'll be you.
I write the final report. It's called the Beyond Low Rate Initial Production Report.
Okay. And then what action does the department intend to take based on this testing? Operational changes, changes to deployment of the aircraft, or changes in terms of acquisition plans?
For the F-35?
For the A-10C.
Well, I think when we did find something that we're finding, and we found the other day when we flew the F-35 in combat, is when we flew the 5th gen and the 4th gen, there was a very good synergy of the two platforms. The F-35 works as a great quarterback. It's like a mini AWACS out there, data fusion. To be able to coordinate with the 4th gen really provides a good performance. I think the biggest thing that may come out of this is developing new tactics to be able to do these missions and with a 5th gen, 4th gen mixture.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to get back to the F-22. I'm not happy at all, but that's ancient history. It's gone. What I am unhappy about, I still always ask the questions about the parts for the F-22. And here we go again. Why have that aircraft if you don't have that parts for it? It's just like the F-35. And I'm showing my ignorance, but I think that is unpardonable because that is a great aircraft, just as we're finding out about the F-35. I had more questions about the F-35. It's too expensive, and that was probably the biggest pain on this committee, which I haven't changed at all. But how can we ensure that that F-22, particularly in NORAD and everything else, and that's going to be one of our major points that they have those parts? I'm going to start asking over and over again because I think there is C4 or C3 often, which means not combat ready or not deployable. General Holmes, and by the way, thank you for Red Flag. Everybody on this committee should go there. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Congressman. I agree with you that the Air Force, we need to sustain the aircraft that we have. And what I would come back to is the the budget pressures that the Air Force was under with the Budget Control Act and the tight budgets that we looked at, and going back to the chairman's comment of a limited budget. So trying to balance through that period.
I know, but a few of us here, Mike Turner always raises hell for the Air Force, if he's had a haircut or not. But there's a number of us that are strong advocates, and you remember when the U-2 was going to be killed, and General Scaparrotti said, no, I need it in Korea. And I think it was one of the best decisions. And by the way, I like the part where the U-2 is upgrade. And that thing, the U-2 is not as old as I am, but it's getting close. And because I'm lying about my age every year.
Sir, if I could, this year we moved almost $500 million into
I know,
22
I know,
sustainment.
and I love it. And I just the fact that you take the frame, you do it all over again, put all the aviation, I think that's the only way to go. So I'm very, very happy with it. Admiral, on the F-35 variant with the machine gun, are the problems over where that works external? I thought it was something problem or kind of, and I'm not an aviator, obviously. I'm a ground guy. But have we solved that with the machine gun external? Maybe that's a bad phraseology to the aircraft. You know what I'm talking about, I think.
Yes, Mr. Congressman, thank you. For the F-35A, they have an internal machine gun, Gatling gun. And for the F-35B and C, they have a pod that's on the center line.
I'm talking about the B and C primarily.
Yes, sir. So we've overcome the manufacturing inefficiencies that were the initial concerns of those gun pods with the General Dynamics. And to date now, with the testing of those gun pods are meeting the specification. The lethality evaluation is still ongoing by the operational testers.
Good. My last question, and Mike, close your ears. The S-400, which, as we know, we have had discussions with some of our allies that are acquiring the F-35 and also the S-400. This is going to be a problem with NATO allies, I'm afraid. How concerned is anyone on this panel with that, the fact that we have perhaps one of the greatest aircraft, and you look at the screen and no one detects us? It's going to change if we have that interface of technology, what have you. No one wants to tackle that one at all? Probably a smart reply, but Admiral?
Well, sir, I'll take the first stab. First of all, the department and the administration has been very clear that an S-400 and an F-35 is incompatible, and we're on the record for that. And the senior administration continues to have open dialogue with their counterparts in the government of Turkey. From an F-35 perspective, we've been given direction to ensure that we can minimize any disruption from supply chain, for example. In the event of anything that occurs later this summer, we are tracking to the first aircraft arrival, which are those two Turkish aircraft that are scheduled to fly into country in November, which will not occur if they procure the S-400. I stay out of the S-400, but from an F-35 perspective, I can give you confidence that we're doing the appropriate actions in advance to minimize production disruption and to safeguard the technology that we've invested
That's
in.
all I want.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Admiral. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm an Army guy, and for those of you that didn't view the hearing yesterday, the Army fielded only 4 people to handle Army modernization. I see you've doubled the number here. I don't know what that says about the Air Force capability or capacity or readiness, but we're glad to have you here. Let me ask you about the F-35 and specifically the life cycle sustainment plan. And in the plan, it outlines a approach to getting to $25,000 per cost per flight hour. And I think everyone seems to be in agreement that we can get there by 2025. And please correct me if I'm wrong. My question is, how has the cost to operate the F-35's fleet come down since the first IOC? My understanding is that the costs controlled by the industry team have come down by about 15% over the past 2 to 3 years, and what actions is the department taking to help reduce the cost to operate and support the F-35? And whoever's best equipped to field it, you'll know better than I.
Mr. Congressman, I'll start that from
Okay.
the F-35 JPO perspective first. First of all, the Life Cycle Sustainability Plan, the LCSP as we call it, I will tell you that the traditional document is one that usually gives strategic guidance. This time, the department took a different tact, and it's truly an implementation plan with crisp actions, with follow-through, and metrics to track our ability to truly get our hands around the life cycle costs of F-35. And we use the LCSP as our document to move forward with. From a specific 25 by 25, I will tell you that our current F-35A cost per flying hour is $44,000. That's on the record. That's actuals from FY18. We have targets over the fit-up, and we've been doing a fit over the next 5 years to understand how we can actually march down the cost per flying hour to get to, as I said in my opening statement, to an affordable cost per flying hour for the United States services, because they have other demands, those resources outside of F-35. Right now, we are targeting a $34,000 cost per flying hour for the F-35A in 2024. We know the levers, we know the initiatives in spare parts, in what we call depot level repair, being able to repair those parts, the ability for our service members to actually conduct the maintenance on the flight line, which reduces the turnaround times, and be able to give them the tools and the maintenance plans to be able to do that work.
So are we confident that we can get to 25 by 25?
I will go on the record, sir, that 25 by 25 is a target.
Okay.
I am targeting 34 and 24. So
Let me, if I can, just because I have another question, I don't have
Yes,
much
sir.
time. Like Representative Cook, he's no longer here. I'm not really a ground guy, but I love the ground guys. I was rotary wing, so I'm low and I'm slow, and I like the A-10. And I know that you've talked about the A-10 versus the F-35 in terms of assessing its mission performance. Moving away from that, given the conversation that we've been having about F-35, F-15X, what does that mean for the A-10? Are there, and in terms of between now and when we project to be the last flight hour of the A-10 and the milestones between now and then, has any of that changed? And when is the last flight hour of the A-10?
Thanks, Congressman. We like the A-10 too. And when you do the analysis, it's our most cost-effective and effective platform in that permissive environment to operate. And we plan to keep the A-10. We plan to re-wing A-10s. We plan to get to the rest of their structural issues and what we call the hogback. And when you take care of wings and the hogback, the airplane can fly a long time beyond the ability of some of our other fourth gen.
And let me just say this in the last 30 seconds. What I like about the A-10, aside from the performance evaluation and the cost and the fact that it's in the Maryland National Guard, but what I really like about it is the F-35 is highly sought after. And everyone's going to be competing for that airtime and for that mission. But the guys on the ground, the men and women on the ground, they know that the A-10 has really a limited mission set. It's close air support, and that's what they want. So I hope that the A-10, and I'm picking up perhaps where McSally left off when she went over to the Senate, I hope the A-10 has a long life remaining in the fleet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I have 1 minute to respond? I just want to go back to the cost per flying hour for the F-35. The JPO estimate, Matt's estimate in 2024 is $34,000 per hour for the A's. Our estimate's $36,000 per hour for the A's, about the same. The department doesn't see a path to get to $25,000 per flying hour by FY25. There's a fair number of studies going on right now that are going to provide some more information to that, but that's a target, and it's not our projections for where we're actually going to be. And then after 2024, our projections are that the costs per flying hour are going to start to increase, flatten out and increase a little bit, because the planes are starting to age, and we're going to have to bring them back into depot, and so the costs are going to increase at that point. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And because I saw my friend, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, scribing out his potential rebuttal to Mr. Cook's comments about Turkey, I wanted to echo Colonel Cook's concerns. If Turkey wants to be treated like an ally, they need to act like one. And I appreciate Admiral's statements about the incompatibility of their plans with the S-400 and the F-35. But I am increasingly concerned about Turkey's malign influence campaign globally and specifically in Venezuela. And so where they're extracting gold, they're bringing it back to prop up the lira, and that's creating broader instability. And so I think that the concerns with Turkey go beyond just the S-400. I think there are other foreign affairs concerns that we have with them, and I would be deeply concerned about the delivery of the F-35 system to them at this point, given their broad or bad behavior. Moving more specifically to the subject of our hearing, Admiral Winter, I represent the great folks with the 33rd at Eglin Air Force Base that are engaged in the training mission with the F-35. They have at times been concerned about the delivery of parts so that they're able to complete the training syllabus and get you your great aviators to go and populate combat squadrons. I have received more recent feedback that the standing up of parts depots and the Congress's investment in additional parts resources has been helpful, but can you provide an update as to our expectations to deliver those parts? Because what I hate hearing from the 33rd is that they'll send a part for repair, and then that part will head out to a combat squadron, and then we're kind of eating our seed corn. And I know getting those parts to our combat squadrons is important, but if we're not training the next generation of aviators, then ultimately that has an impact on the durability of our mission. Admiral?
Mr. Congressman, thank you for that question, and your concern is a valid one. Our training fleet has been a priority behind our warfighter coded, combat coded fleet. And as we ramp up our parts production and parts delivery, we have gone back to the services, the Air Force, Navy, and the Marine Corps, to ensure that those priorities are aligned to their service priorities. What's really bringing the training fleet back to full capability is the modification from TR1 to TR2. So that's a technical refresh of those older jets that are predominantly down at Eglin, and being able to have the updated capacity for computing, for displays, and for the radar and other systems that will increase their reliability. That will be completed by the middle of next year. Right now, we're targeting June of 2020, of not all of just the training, but the entire fleet. That is a first order effect of getting the 33rd specifically up to the reliability levels of the rest of the fleet. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that. One of the other benefits that the 33rd has due to their location is that they are able to access the Gulf test range in a lot of their work and in a lot of the execution of the syllabus. Can you speak to the importance within the training mission of having access to the telemetry and radar systems that allow our aviators to be well prepared when they head on to combat squadrons?
Mr. Congressman, as the PEO for F-35, I think that's more in the lanes of either General Holmes or others, but we provide the capability and the support for that training output.
Congressman, yeah, we're really struggling with the mics here, but we're going to try to push really quickly to get in. So I cannot underscore enough how important our ranges are. I mean, we're dealing with a peer competitor again, which means we're going to have to test in operationally realistic environments. And there are going to be places that we're going to trust simulation, but there's nothing better than getting data in the real world. And so the testing that we're able to do both in the Gulf and in some of our other ranges is critical to getting acquisitions correct. So you will find us fierce champions of keeping our ranges fully operational, fully funded, so that we get the benefits that they give Air Force acquisition and the department as a whole, because we test more than...
And the Gulf test range offers unique capabilities, right? Because it's the only place where we can live fire over water and have munitions land on land, right?
Only place you can live fire over water. You've got our Program Executive Office for Weapons is at Eglin Air Force Base, so that's serendipitous. So Eglin is a very important base for us in the Air Force. It's important for the nation.
And is it a good idea or a bad idea to launch experimental missiles over oil rigs?
It's probably not a good idea, Congressman.
Right. So I think it's critically important, as we're hearing you say, that, and echoing Ms. Hartzler's comments, that you know, our munitions development is critical to execution of the National Defense Strategy to meet our near-peer adversaries. The only place we're able to do this particular type of testing is the Gulf Test Range. And in 2022, if we do not take action in the NDAA or otherwise, we're going to have oil rigs there instead of the weapons testing that we need to preserve the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a few moments, gentlemen. First of all, thank you for the conversation about thinking behind your proposal for 5th gen, 4th gen mixture. I appreciate that very much. I want to echo the sentiments of Representatives Brown and Gallego about the A10 and just say that, you know, I hope that you'll continue to make sure that you maintain that asset and that capability well into the future and think about it beyond that. For the guy on the ground, the close air support is awfully important. That A10 is impressive. You know, when you got some kind of forward of a controller out there with you, calling in close air support and being able to get nice and tight, it makes a big difference. I know that doesn't figure into your testing, sir, but it inspires confidence on the ground. And the sound of that 30 millimeter is just calming in its own special kind of way. So with that, let me just ask Mr. Baylor, I'd like to join Mr. Gallego in any kind of briefing that you give when you're ready to do that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that should not be too long from now that we'll have the final results.
Thank you. I just want to begin by saying the only rebuttal I have to Mr. Cook is he knows I have a 2 o'clock haircut appointment today. So he just wants to claim credit for it, but he already knows that I'm having it cut at 2, so whatever. Not as a pressing issue as Turkey, obviously. Part of the problem that I think that we have here with the F-35 and the 15X discussion is that regardless of the fact that the Air Force is saying that the recommendation for the 15X is not happening at the expense of the F-35, it is. The Air Force is coming to us requesting fewer F-35s in the future. And my concern is that we're going to be repeating the same mistakes that we've made before. Admiral, as you know, our goal is more planes. The more planes we buy, the cost goes down. We don't have an ability to ramp up without having taken that step each and every year, both in our supply chain. I mean, we're an unreliable purchaser. So when we look to the supply chain and the need for people to invest downstream, and they look forward as to what the reliability of our commitment to purchases, it's a riskier investment. So each year, if we ramp up, our costs go down, the supply chain gets a chance to respond. If we zigzag, if we go up and down, if we have future projections that we don't meet, we're causing our own problems in the delivery of parts and in the ability of the production line to continue at a faster pace. Dr. Roper, you said that we're living currently with some problems that were created in the past. Aren't we creating those problems and continuing in the future? Don't we need to make a greater commitment to the F-35 for it to have the sustainability in production, in supply chain, and in lowering costs?
Yeah, Congressman Turner, we are fully committed to the F-35, and we are making those investments to get to full rate production. It's just a reality that the investments are long lead. We have to get the total supply chain under control.
But isn't that true that it's a rolling long lead? That if I don't make that decision this year, and then I have to make it again next year, and then I have to make it again next year, you institutionalize the inability of the production line and of the supply chain to meet your needs.
Yeah, Congressman, you don't just look at your supply chain for the immediate year. When we talk about F-35 in the department, we talk about the path to getting to full rate production and the investments that need to be made in the supply chain to get to full rate. So we're buying a full
So you're
fleet.
currently planning on reducing your planned buys of F-35As by 30 in the future year defense plan. And if I'm in your supply chain and I look at that and I'm making a decision for investment, you have just negatively impacted my long-term plan, which will not allow you in the future to ramp up production in the supply chain, right?
So, Congressman, we are working very diligently with Lockheed Martin to get to full rate production by Lot 15.
Doesn't that require that you buy them? I mean, if you continue to project that you're going to reduce your production, you can't get to full rate production, and no one is going to look at you as a reliable partner by not taking that step of commitment.
Yeah, Congressman, and I'll certainly try to allay your concerns that we want to buy the max number of planes that the line can produce in a healthy fashion. I'm sure Admiral Winter would be happy to go through some of the issues.
Well, we actually had that hearing. We know that there's extra capacity in the production line that can be met right now.
Yeah, Congress,
so we know that, Dr.
But it has to be supported by the base that can sustain that production.
Dr. Roper, but we've had that meeting. We understand that the capacity is there. Now, if you don't meet the full capacity this year, you're not going to have an ability to increase capacity the following year, because this is a stair step. And if you flatline it, or if you have a jagged commitment to purchases, you're going to affect that yourself. General Holmes, it's great to hear you talking about the A-10. You know, this is a very frustrating discussion to have about the 15X, because as you know, there was no discussions whatsoever about the 15X just months ago. But it's a 40-plus year decision that you're making. Now you sit in front of us and say how great the A-10 is, but you know the only reason you have the A-10 is because we had hearings like this where the Air Force stood in front of us and said we need to stop the A-10, and we would not let you. Similarly, there have been programs where the Air Force has said we're going to go march this way, then we're going to go march that way. How is it that a program comes out of thin air with just months, no requirements, no competition, a 40-year-plus decision gets just airdropped in the middle of the Air Force long-range plan when there has been no discussion about this previously?
Thank you, Congressman. Every year in my term as the Air Force 5/8, the subject of more 4th Gen came up, and the F-15X usually came up as part of that discussion. And the reason is because it's a line that's open. The A-10 line is not open. The F-15 line is open. So every year there are proposals that come in, and every year it's been considered. In the years prior to this year, we had all the money that we could use was given to try to get to 48 F-35s because of the limits on the budget. And we have, I think there are a lot of people that are glad we still have the A-10, but the reason the Air Force had a discussion about the A-10 in the first place was because of the Budget Control Act and limited budgets. It drove us to try to make some choices and to bring choices to the Congress. I'm glad we still have the A-10. This discussion has been made every year in the 3 years I was the 5/8 and in the 2 years since then. The question is, why this year? And I think the reason why this year is partly what we talked about. It's at the F-15C. We have more information. It's not going to make it. F-15Cs are parked now that we can't fly. And to try to get to 72 within the money that's available in the Air Force budget and the money that the Department of Defense gives for the fighter portfolio, this was the way that we could get to 72 airplanes. It was not affordable to get to 72 airplanes in the F-35.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Winter, the April 2019 GAO report indicated that the F-35s were not meeting half of their reliability and maintainability metrics, which obviously leads to an expensive and not very and less reliable asset that is costing a sustainment cost of about $1.1 trillion. This is challenging, especially when you consider the supply chain problem that seems to exist. I understand that DoD has taken steps to address this issue and close the gap, but moreover, you mentioned that we are behind 600 parts per month. This is obviously very alarming. How are we addressing this? Can you provide us with an update on this issue?
Mr. Congressman, absolutely, and thank you for that question. I will make sure that I address the 600 parts to the production line, which aren't exactly tangential to the reliability maintainability improvement program. That was the report subject by my colleague, Mr. Sullivan, which I will say that I appreciate the GAO's continued help and engagement to ensure that we're keeping ourselves focused across all lines of effort in the F-35. From our spare parts and our production parts, our supply chain is pressurized in being able to give the capacity of output for spare parts and sustainment and production line new parts. We have traced a couple of causal factors. One is the slowness of our prime contractors to actually put out what's called a purchase order, so be able to tell the supply chain to start generating those parts. We've helped our prime contractors to increase the agility of their business systems to be able to do that. Second, we've looked into our supply chain to determine where the capacity barriers are, and we're providing resources for them to increase capacity in the supply chain to generate those new parts. Third, we're removing their requirement to repair those broken parts and getting that stood up in our U.S. Air Force and Navy depots so that we can get more parts to the flight line for our maintainers to fix airplanes and more parts to the to the production lines so we can reduce that backlog and keep the production line moving forward.
So to what extent has the problem now been addressed? 80%, 50%? What kind of success are we having?
So, sir, because of what I call the delta growth, as we are ramping up the production so that the capacity needed for more parts because of the increased production line and the increased fielding of aircraft into our warfighters' fleets, the demand signal we can measure, but we do not have a stable baseline of demand. That demand continues to move forward. To give you a percentage of what we have accomplished would be hard to calculate. What I can tell you is that we've talked to the entire supply chain from Lockheed Martin and the airframe and Pratt & Whitney and the propulsion system, and with consistent engagement for their requirement to tell us where their shortfalls are. The majority of our supply chain is within the United States, but there are areas of our supply chain that are in the international domain that we need to continue to make sure that that stays whole. So right now, my main focus to Lockheed and Pratt is to make sure that their tiered suppliers, the first and second tiered suppliers, are communicating where their shortfalls are. That wasn't happening in the past. So I will take for the record a percentage of the supply chain that has been engaged, but I will tell you that the majority of that supply chain has been engaged, and we've been identifying where those bottlenecks are in the supply chain, and we're tackling them as we get them identified.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a whole series of questions, so if we have time afterwards, I can get maybe a second round in if time allows. But first of all, thank you for being here. I've worked with General Holmes, and I get widely respected and trusted, and it's good to see you again, especially with a couple more stars on. So congratulations. And my first question is, what I think I heard from you today was a strong affirmation for the F-35, F-15 mix, but do I have that right?
Yes, sir. The F-35 is the future of the Air Force, and to get us through this period, we need to pursue a mix of airplanes, and this is the most cost-effective way to do it.
And it seems to me we're in this situation because we canceled the F-22 production around 2010. Is that a fair judgment?
Congressman, I think that's certainly a factor that we canceled the F-22, and then we made decisions to wait based on what we hoped could be accelerated in the F-35, and it turned out it wasn't able to be accelerated.
Right. What is our air-to-air superiority requirement, and how much does the F-22 fulfill of that requirement? Mm-hmm.
Investing money in new technologies that will someday be a successor for the Joint Force, the capability that will make sure we can do that into the future.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And Congressman, as we modernize the F-22, one of the things that we're really excited about is switching to open architecture. So once we open up the systems, that will give us a great tool to keep it current We'll work software concurrently in modernization and sustainment so that if the warfighters' needs shift between modernization to sustaining and back to modernization, we'll have a production pipeline that can deal with that. But open systems have to be our standard going forward. We have to design things up front for sustainability. So that's a lesson learned that we'll take into all new programs, but I'm excited to get it on F-22.
I was going to come back to that because MOSA is like my third question. I was going to come back to you on it. But I want to ask Admiral Winter, on the F-35, we had this giant sensor, all these sensors on the F-35. Are we making progress on how and getting that data off the jet real time back to the Air Operations Center so that the follow-on sorties have that data before the F-35 lands?
Mr. Congressman, that's a great question. Internally, from a tactics perspective, our multifunctional advanced data link communication amongst F-35s is the primary information exchange, and then our Link 16 conduit to other non-F-35, not just airframe, but from surface ships to satellites and everything in between. From a data engagement on the aircraft itself, to be able to come back from a mission planning, and more importantly, from a threats-based effects, to be able to update our mission data files. We are challenged in being able to meet the turnaround times that our warfighter needs. General Holmes has made it crystal clear that we need to get our mission data file reprogramming agility up to speed. We need to get our simulators ahead of the aircraft software releases, and we need to get our Alice system up to speed to be able to generate at scale the growing fleet. We have initiatives, investment initiatives, supported by this subcommittee on all three of those efforts to get after that. Thank you, sir.
This is a real important issue, Mr. Chairman. You have in phase 2, phase 3, your best sensors are the F-35, maybe the F-22 as well, or perhaps the B-21 in the future. But we have to get that data off real time because there's other guys getting ready to go into the fight, and they can't wait 2 or 3 hours for the aircraft to land. So I think it's an important problem to work on. Dr. Roper, you already talked about this a little bit. I've been a big advocate for the modular open system architecture, or last cycle we were calling it SOSA, now we're calling it MOSA. Are we making good progress when it comes to EW and ISR with these open architectures?
Congressman, we are. It's much easier to do when you're in the design of a program. You make it one of the criteria for the competitive award. For programs that we already have designed from the past, we're really having to work hard to get it into them as part of a sustainability imperative. Things like F-22, the F-35, and Block 4, when they get TR-3, will have open systems on it. It's a challenge because if the system wasn't designed for it, you have to do a lot more work to put it in after the fact. But in terms of lowering costs for sustainability and keeping the warfighter's edge through the ability to modernize, it's completely worth it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, but if we have time to come back later, I do want to talk about the light attack program because there's some question about where we're at with that. Medium altitude ISR, want to have some affirmation there, and also some EW questions, but if we have time when we're done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all. General Holmes, you just talked about the challenges on air superiority to near peers. We just heard yesterday from Northcom that the F-35 is the best possible way of combating the challenges that we're facing up north in the Arctic Circle from Russia. And I'm just curious, the thoughts around moving to the 15X, how are we looking for that in the long term? How are we going to be able to keep the edge, keep the warfighter's edge? And I guess this question goes to anyone who wants to chime in on it.
So as I think I understand the question is that if we invest in the F-15X instead of the F-35? How about now? How about now? There we go. Thank you. It's the impact of F-15Xs in the Homeland Defense role vice the F-35. Right now, our day-to-day alert of the United States is covered by a mix of F-16s and F-15s. And as we go forward in the future, we'll have a mix, I think, of 4th and 5th gen threats. For some of the scenarios, having a big airplane that carries a big payload and a electronically scanned radar that can find cruise missiles won't be in a threat environment that requires that very sophisticated low observability of the F-35. For some cases where you're trying to move forward and take on long-range bombers that are escorted by sophisticated fighters and shooting long-range cruise missiles, it will be. So I think you'll see a mix of the forces presented to Northcom, just like you'll see a mix in the forces we present to other COCOMs of 5th gen and 4th gen, and they'll have a requirement for both.
Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add a comment about how we're going to test these things. We have a joint simulation environment that is getting close to being complete, and we'll be putting the F-35 in a test in there to fight against simulated, accredited threats like the J-20, J-21, surface-to-air threats, electronic warfare in an environment that we can't do in open air. So going forward, as we develop the Block 4 and other capabilities, the B-2 and other 5th generation assets, we'll have to use this simulation environment to really look at the capabilities that it has against the 5th generation. I'll add one more point, is that 5th generation pilots like to fight against 5th generation threats. And today, we do not have any 5th generation full-size threats that we need to think about in the future.
But aren't we going to be looking at the, going further out? Isn't that the long-term issue that we're going to be dealing with, right? Today, we've got F-15s, F-15Es, F-16s. Where do we, I feel like we're going to be moving into a more and more challenging environment. We're not getting to a point where we're going to be moving into fully functional 5th generation and all 5th generation fleet. And by the time that we are having this conversation again, we're already going to be moving into 6th generation. So, what does this mean for the long-term sustainability? And then going back to what my colleague said earlier, the supply chain, I think that's a real challenge that we have when we're not making predictable procurement. Then how are we going to ensure that we do deal with those challenges on an ongoing basis? Anyone?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The one thing I would add is that, as we said, we love the F-35. We're committed to the F-35. We have not budged from our total buy and the total program and our goals to acquire the F-35. It's a question of when and how will we pay for it, and how will we continue to modernize the airplane to adjust it to improving threats. Thank you, though, for your interest in it.
So can you talk about the cost per hour on the F-15X? I know that you talked about trying to get it down to $25,000 for the 35. What do we project as the cost per hour on the 15X?
Mr. Bagel, you want to? Yeah, I'll take all time. All right. I'll tackle that one, but first let me go back to the operational side of the conversation. Even in the high-end warfights, there will be, as General Holmes said, instances in which you need penetrating aircraft going forward, but there will still be missions in the high-end fight where you don't need those assets, where you still need cruise missile defensive air bases, for example. And in that situation, for those missions, having a higher inventory of weapons on the plane makes more sense than investing in the stealthy aspects of that plane, because you don't need them to go forward. The 15X cost per flying hour estimate between 2020 and 2035, which is the way we did it in program budget review this year, is $29,000 per flying hour. The F-18s, by way of example, the F-18EFs right now are about $23,000 per flying hour. F-15Es, I think, are sitting right around 34, but they're a little bit older than the EXs would be.
Okay, thank you. And then General Holmes and Lieutenant General Larardi, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the role that the U-2 still plays in the modern world, knowing that there's probably some skeptics that think that with drones and satellites, why are we still flying these 50-year-old planes? But what makes their ISR capability unique?
Just from the joint perspective, I mean, the balance of capabilities are important. So, while we develop enhanced capabilities in all domains, and we're certainly pressing to do that, retaining the capability to do things, to surveil and recon targets from all realms remains important, especially in the near term as we look out into the 20s and the kinds of capabilities we'll require.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I want to go to our Air Force members here. We've gotten a sneak peek of a pretty exciting aircraft, the XQ-58A Valkyrie, UAV platform that has a tactical capability there, pretty amazing in what it'll do. with both defensive and offensive counter-air measures, also being able to soak up enemy fire, also being able to take on enemy air defenses. Let me ask a question about how that platform, first of all, is going to be integrated into the fight. And we look at certain concepts, the whole idea is, will it fight by itself? Will it integrate in with existing aircraft? Will it kind of be a wingman in that battle space? Secondly has it been developed so that, and we know the systems out there like Link 16 where these systems get to not only talk to each other, but talk to other systems out there. Is this XQ-58A, is it being developed to work directly with the F-35? And if so, how will that affect where you are operating now in future contested airspace? And what will this do to either change the way we fight or to give us additional capabilities in what we do in that high-end fight?
Thanks, Congressman, and I'm sure that Dr. Roper may want to add something to this. I'd start by saying that we're testing some exciting things, and part of the reason we're testing these exciting things is because of Dr. Roper coming over to join us as our senior acquisition executive and bringing over some ideas and helping our guys come up with new ones. I think the test article of the Valkyrie, as you spoke, is a test of a lower cost, more attritable, more affordable resource that we're now flying, and we'll have the chance to fit into some of our concepts and see how it works. It is a test article that still would have to have sensors, would have to have the command and control system to make it work, would have to work through the weapons part. And I think the goal of flying it is to get it out there and test it and experiment with our 4th and 5th gen existing airplanes and with the things we might field in the future and see how they work. I'd also like to give a plug to the Air Force's warfighter integration capability and office that we've stood up in our headquarters, Air Force A5, that is focused on exactly what you spoke of, sir, to come up with concepts for the future on how to do these things better.
Congressman Whitman, and you and I have spoken about this many times. When I was in OSD, I thought there was a powerful role to give a high-end fighter a wingman that you could take risk with, that you could attrit, that would not necessarily have to return and land. And the Valkyrie's a platform that we started in an OSD program called Avatar that we're now promoting into a 6.4 or prototyping program called Skyborg. The initiative is to do precisely what General Holmes said, and that is to try to determine what sensors, what payloads, what networking do we need to put on it to give the fighter pilot a huge advantage flying against an enemy that does not have the ability to take risk. So we'll learn this not just by doing technology demonstrations. We're going to be working with the operator, with the warfighter, and we're excited to see where this program goes. And in terms of where it goes, when the F-35 gets Tech Refresh 3, it gets a system called Open Mission Systems, which would allow the F-35, if we so chose, to command and control UAVs. So the pilot would truly be able to quarterback a team of systems. It sounds like the future, but it's here, and we hope that the Valkyrie will help us get that over the goal line.
Well, the Valkyrie 2 is very, I think, appropriate because we look at costs and how we get more per our unit cost, as you and I have talked about, than our adversaries get per their unit cost. We have to be able to do more. We have the technology to do that. The Valkyrie is one of those areas at a very low price, about $3 million roughly per aircraft. If you make more, the price goes down. I think it's particularly significant that that's part of our strategy too, not only to invoke cost on our adversaries, but to save cost on our side. One other thing too is as we talk about the F-15EX, will the F-15EX be able to integrate in its air combat systems the ability to work jointly then with the Valkyrie in that airspace? Because if we're going to be investing in that aircraft out in the future and it can't integrate with another future platform there that gives it an enhanced capability, then you do have to question the investment we're making now with F-15EX.
Congressman, that's what we're currently working. So I've given the authority to our program office to develop an acquisition strategy. We have talked about the importance of open mission systems. We think it's critically important if we pursue the F-15EX to have it be an open system, not just for the sustainability, but for the option to do the things you just mentioned, sir.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
That was the bell. I think we have about 10 minutes, so we're going to split the time between Mrs. Hartzler and myself. A lot of great discussion. I want to hear from the Joint Staff about the decision-making on the F-15E, what your view was, that why, and following up on Mr. Turner's question, did this plane at this time with capabilities that are available, why was this one selected, and the view from your end?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, as the NDS was, Secretary Mattis directed the NDS, the National Defense Strategy, we also had a joint military net assessment that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had directed us to look at. And this is, in shorthand, competitive areas that we assess ourselves against our adversaries to understand the net outcome. In implementing the National Defense Strategy, the chairman also asked us to look at these competitive areas and what could we do in the competitive areas which span the domains, including the air domain, to enhance our competitive advantage against our adversaries. And we in the Joint Staff looked at, among other things, the requirement to have a mix of capabilities that we thought would enable us to be successful as we looked out to a 5-year period. This occurred in the summer of last year in time to provide some feedback into the program budget review in the fall. Our perspective at the time was that first we needed to have the 5th generation capability for the high-end fight that we envisioned that was captured in the National Defense Strategy guiding the department. Second, we also saw that we had to have additional capacity in terms of being able to meet the combatant commander's requirements in multiple locations, but also to reinforce a main fight if that happened with more aircraft, more bombs, the ability to have, while the F-35 program comes on board over the next several years in greater quantities as we remain committed to that program, filling that gap with F-15, new F-15s, ones that could carry greater ordnance, provide the combatant commanders in multiple theaters with additional capacity, was something that we saw as an important characteristic. And so as this came together in the fall in the program budget review, we looked at this from the standpoint of a balance of capabilities that was appropriate as we look to the future.
So what I heard is capacity was important.
Capacity was important.
So did you look at doubling down additional resources for the F-35 issues out there as a possibility?
It was a possibility. Cost was a factor. Capacity was, in our assessment, a main factor, but cost was a factor. And given that balance, as we looked at some of the numbers that Kate was running in the Air Force, we thought that a mix of aircraft was the best outcome.
The F-15, let me just switch. Talk about some of the systems. It's an active line. So the F-15C of almost 30 years ago and the one today, it was mentioned to us the EPAWS system and some of the radar, because of the large diameter of the fuselage, was critical in this decision. Can you touch base on that?
Oh, sir. Yeah, the F-15EX has got some significant advantages over the C model just because of the development that was done over the years. And as Dr. Roper said, the Qataris and the Saudi Arabia certainly helped us with the investment. The APG-82, the ESA radar on the front, the EPAWS system, as well as the internal computer that's going to come off the line. It's going to help support some of these systems. It's going to have many additional weapon stations over what a C model has. It's going to give it some magazine depth, which will make it very unique in certain mission sets, especially if you look at counter-cruise missile and other mission sets this aircraft can do. That's going to give it advantages over what a C model can do right now, just purely over 30-plus years of technological advancement into the F-15C, much of that enabled by our allies. Sir.
Mrs. Hartzler, thank you.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to take 2 minutes and then yield the remaining 3 to Representative Bacon. But the F-35 baseline program, and this is going to Mr. Sullivan, the baseline program was developed concurrently, doing development, production, testing, all at the same time, which led to much of the cost and schedule overruns. And now the program office is taking a new acquisition approach to Block 4, referred to as continuous capability development and delivery. Given your acquisition expertise, do you think this approach can be successful? I can't, yeah.
We have concerns because when we look at it, the first thing is it's a $10.5 billion estimated investment today, and that is not for the complete program. That would be through 2024. They don't have an independent cost estimate yet, which would usually be done by CAPE. They have their own cost estimate, but we like the independent estimates to go with a complete business case before you sign a contract that's going to make a major investment of this kind of money, $10.5 billion. We'd also like to verify the technologies that are going to go on to Block 4. Block 4 is a lot of new software and some hardware as well, as they're going to do a technology refresh 3, putting in new processors and things like that. There's going to be work done on the weapons bay. There's going to be new weapon integration on there. I think small diameter bomb 2 and a couple of other weapons. So it's not a small thing, obviously, given that money. So we've made a recommendation that it should be its own major defense acquisition program because it meets the statute. You know, $10.5 billion is a lot of money for one single investment. So we'd like to see it have its own baseline. Right now, it's just part of the F-35's, the baseline aircraft program. So the $10.5 billion has been kind of put in with the baseline at this point.
I thought that was a very interesting proposal. You mentioned that in your opening remarks. We'll keep looking at that. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time to Representative Bacon.
Thank you. I know we're getting pressed here with our votes, so I'll try to be real quick and just try to make our responses to the point. But my first question is Dr. Roper. On the light attack, the Air Force expressed commitment to a light attack platform, and now it sounds like it's sort of pulled back from that, despite the fact there's been a lot of investments made there. We heard from SOCOM that there's a definite requirement for a light attack platform. So where are we at with the light attack?
So Congressman, I'll begin, but I'm sure that General Holmes will want to give the requirements point of view. From an acquisition point of view, light attack was an interesting approach to take, to go out and start working with industry, gain experimental data to determine what performance could be gained with commercially available aircraft. I think we've learned a lot working with the 2 vendors, and we're proud to continue working with them. I believe we'll be purchasing a few of each aircraft and going out and continuing to do operationally realistic tests and look at some additional modernizations. But I think we've also learned that there are other aircraft that could do the light attack mission, that there's a case for turbojets, there's a case for drones, and so rather than do what acquisition so often does, which is commit early, we want to make sure that we've experimented with every option so that when we make the choice to proceed, we do so with confidence and having as much data on the table as we can have.
General Holmes, you got anything to add?
Just the authorities that Congress gave us let us go fast and let us trying to work through these decisions much faster than we would have been able to in the past, and we're grateful for that. As we look at a light attack airplane, the requirements are a mix of what would the U.S. Air Force use, and then how would we use that airplane to partner with our allies in places that don't need the higher end air assets and with partners that can't afford one. So all the way through the program, we've looked at, could we acquire an airplane that's also, there's an interest in some of our partners that can't afford to operate an F-35 and maybe not even an F-16 to be able to have an aircraft that fits their requirements. When we did our business case analysis, most of the people that would pursue a turboprop airplane already have one or are acquiring one, and so we wanted to open the aperture and look at some other aircraft types and see if we can find one that is low cost to communicate, is low cost to operate, but still meets the requirements for our partners so that they can do things on their own and we don't have to do it for them.
I have a RC-135 question I'll have to wrap up. We keep hearing, I get mixed signals from the Air Force on medium altitude manned ISR, but yet we know in a phase 0, phase 1, nothing can replace it right now. I think there's an ACC study that says exactly that. In fact, I just want to hear your view on the commitment towards the RC-135 program, obviously important for our district.
And Air Combat Command as well, sir. That's half of what we do. We're going to continue to pursue a mix of modernized air systems, but we also want to look at the other ways to gather that information. As the threat gets better and better and better, as you understand very well, they're capable of pushing our air assets off further and further, which makes it hard for them to
phase 3, but
to
phase
gather the
0 is
information.
every day.
No, yes, sir. In this preparing the battlefield stage, right now there's nothing to take the place of the RC-135. Over time, as we look at Advanced Battle Management System and as we look at the ISR flight plan that General Jameson has put together, we'll be gathering that information in a mix, I think, of overhead space systems and airborne sensors. But for now, there's no substitute for the mix that we have, which is why we're not advocating this year to remove anything from what we have. The RC-135, as you know, is continuously updated by Big Safari and a fantastic effort to keep it relevant. We believe those airframes are sustainable for at least the near term, and we'll be weighing, like we have with all of our platforms, these big wing platforms, as they reach the end of our service life. Should we buy another big wing platform, or is it time to invest in a way to do that capability in phase 1 and phase 2, but also out into phase 3 and phase 4? And those are the decisions that we're weighing as we go forward. Thanks for the question and for your interest in the subject.
First of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses. It was a great discussion. We have some very big decisions ahead of us, and certainly my colleagues for hanging in there. We are adjourned. Thank you.